that strong applause. I'm going to ignore Mr. Lowell's remarks. He seems to have constituted himself this evening as sort of a cheering section. We don't want to have a mutual admiration society, let me put it that way. So I'll have something to say about him later. Mr. Kinnis, I'll deal with in private. The program is extremely simple. First, I'm going to tell you a story, and not true. And then I'll read a section, well, one stanza from an unfinished poem. Then I'll read you a stanza from a finished poem. And then I'll read you some sections from another unfinished poem. Then we'll wind up for the night. Isn't that the most unappetizing program you ever heard of? I've been listening closely with all four ears to Mr. Kunitz and Mr. Lowell, and I didn't hear that they ever said anything about poetic diction. Now, why should they? Well, the reason they should is because Mrs. Craig, who is minding this series, asked me repeatedly by long-distance telephone to talk about poetic diction, which is supposed to be our, theme this evening. Well, I don't believe in themes. For poetry readings, they're hard enough on their own. Besides, I'm not teaching this year. But, rebellious, still I'm very obedient. So I prepared some remarks about poetic diction, and you know what? I plan to give them. We start with the story. It's rather strange. I haven't given a reading in New York for about 12 years, I would say. And the place is crawling with my relatives, friends, enemies, neutrals. Also, this is the eve of one of the great and ancient Western festivals, in a building of which, on the whole, the less said the better. So it sort of makes you think. So I'll tell you a Halloween story. This took place according to, I don't like the word legend, but I don't know where else to go. 2 years ago, in a middle western city called Minneapolis, which I at present inhabit, on the whole. It's about a big banker, but a really big banker, a complete and absolute jerk. And on Halloween, he prides himself on his good doing, And on Halloween, he had his butler get a basket of apples, big red ones. And then he had the butler polish them apples. And then he had this basket of them apples put by the door. Then he sit down by his fire and wait to do good. And he answered the door himself. And pretty soon comes a scratch, I don't know what. And he goes to the door, it's a tot. And he looked down at that tot. And the tot look up at him and he say, trick or treat. The banker, he reach into the basket and out he take a vast apple, brilliantly polished. And he drop into the paper bag of the tot. And the tot look into the bag, and then he look up at the banker. And he say, you big shit, you've broken my apple, my cookie. I ruined the story. Sorry. I ruined the story. Well, I think we can easily work out, since we are not here in the Yale Graduate School, a theory of diction from this story. Jokes very much like poems and vice versa. Diction, which is nothing but sort of choice of a kind of language, meaning rejection of other kinds of language, ought to be decorous. That is, it ought to be appropriate to the subject. But some subjects, how can you be appropriate to? That is to say, the tot is appropriate, in my opinion. It may seem extravagant on his part to say this. Chairman of the board, First National. But on the whole, it's appropriate. Now, the situations that we come on in poetry are generally extravagant. Problems. Namely, do you try to fit a diction to a situation, or do you take account of the ridiculous and grotesque, horrible, delicious aspects of the situation? No. So now I'm running through a series of problems.